Good morning, Bună dimineața. My name is Erik van Vliet. I'm a zoo designer, and I'm very honored to be in your presence, although not physically. And I would love to tell you a little bit about zoo design from the perspective of its aims. I know you have been busy talking about animal welfare, about security, safety, all those extremely important things, but it's also interesting to ask ourselves the question, why are zoos there, and answering the question about good zoo design from that perspective. Well, most of us will agree that zoos play a very important role in inspiring people, in educating people, in making people enthusiastic about wildlife and nature in general. And zoo design can play a major role in achieving these aims. If you would ask an architect, he would design an interesting building, interesting in terms of shapes, colors, materials, but he doesn't tell a story. So actually we don't need architects to design zoos. We need to have people who work in zoos with heart and soul and know a little bit more, understand a little bit more about the effects zoo design has on visitors, on the perception of visitors, on the way people look at animals and nature in general. We know more and more about our dear friends, the visitors. We know, for instance, that if you confront visitors with animals in cages, they feel pity with them. But they also feel superior. They shout and they make little jokes. They say, hey, let's look at your brother over there in that cage. But if you immerse people in a natural environment where they, first of all don't see any animals at all, their reaction is very different. Their voice becomes a little bit less loud. They're impressed, they don't know where to look, and all of a sudden they see that animal. And the reaction is very similar to what would happen in nature. So if we would design zoos a little bit in that way, we come to very different kinds of zoos than we have nowadays. Today, a zoo exhibit, an enclosure, normally isn't rectangular anymore, luckily, because that's all wrong, animal welfare wise and visitor experience wise. Normally it's a bit, more interesting in shape. But if you allow visitors on their path, on their trail, to go all around, you don't have nothing that comes close to this natural experience. So it's very important not to allow visitors to go all around. This is where the visitors are, here's where the animal is. It's much more interesting to say people go into the exhibit. You create a trail that goes more like this. You step into the world of the animal, and the border between animals and visitors is here. You're in the middle of them. The animals are surrounding you, and there are a lot of, elements of the landscape of the animal here, the natural habitat, and they continue into the exhibit. So you and the animal are in one area. This is very important. And if you look at the barrier, the best thing you can do to create this natural experience is to create a barrier that's entirely invisible. And you can do it. This is a cross section. Here's our friend, the visitor. And if you position a retaining wall here, a little bit higher than the knees of the visitor, and you create a little slope here, and here's the animal exhibit. You go up with the slope here, you come down here, then you can play with the landscape. You can say, well, here we have certain plants and trees and whatever, shrubs, and they continue here in the animal exhibit. Here's the animal. And what you then notice is that the visitor doesn't see this barrier in between. He sees the plants here, and he sees the animal. So this is an entirely free view. A lot of zoos already have these modes, but sometimes they do it entirely wrong. They have a wall, a road, a visitor on the road, and the animal here. Well, if you see the road, the fun and the surprise has gone, because you know already that there will be an animal. There is no natural experience of seeing the animal all of a sudden. So, also without all the money of the world, you can create an exhibit that's entirely invisible. Blurring these barriers, as we actually do, can also take place when you work with glass. If this, again, the cross section is the glass panel. Here's the visitor area. Here's the visitor again, and here is the animal. What makes it very interesting is having, for instance, stones here, boulders, vegetation, like trees and shrubs that are the same on either side. So there is a continuation of the landscape, and you, as a visitor, are in the middle of all that. I know glass is very expensive, so the little trick you can do is only using 2 meters height. Consisting of glass and having the traditional steel mesh barrier on top. The front of the exhibit is extremely important, but also the back of the exhibit. Because if you look at the animal, you don't want to see the animal in a secluded area. You don't want to see that the animal is enclosed, that the animal is only permitted to go into to live his life in a limited space. And there are all sorts of tricks to hide that. Traditionally, if this is a cross section again, here's the visitor, here's the animal. Zoos used to make large rock work enclosures to prevent the animals from escaping. Well, this type of exhibit looked a bit like shoeboxes, just surrounded by walls, and the walls never do look very naturally if you also need to use them as barriers. They are on top of that extremely expensive. There are other ways to create a back of the exhibit that's hardly visible. And you do that by playing with your landscape, by having your bulldozer come in, which is much less expensive than building rockworks, and creating lower sections, higher sections, and hide the barrier. Let's go, for instance, to this little thing that suggests a big moat. If the animals are here, they can't come here because there is a moat. And you see it when you look on top of it. But if we go and sit on our knees, let's sit here. Could you also come and sit here? You see that you don't see the moat anymore. You see a landscape, and you see the beautiful trees and the blue sky in the background. So if you've got an animal in the exhibit, say it's an African exhibit with a giraffe doesn't want to be in the exhibit, but the zebras do want to. There they fall. Luckily, they don't fall into the moat. And you see the animals, and the suggestion is that the animals are entirely free, because behind the animals is the nature, and instead of natural structures like woods and the sky, you also can have predator animals in the background. So it looks like zebras and lions live in the same space, share the same habitat like they would do in Africa, and nobody sees that there is a moat in between. So let's go back to the visitor as a whole. Let's say we have a front, we have a back, and here are the visitors. It's often very interesting to allow visitors to have various viewing zones. Maybe if this is the exhibit, the visitor can stand here and have a very wide look. Maybe he can stand here and has a look from a lower perspective. And maybe he can also be here in a tree hut, climbing up to have a very interesting panorama. And the visitor trail circles around the exhibit, and there is shrubs and forest in between. So every new encounter with the animals is a new surprise. In this way, you can sell your exhibit more than one time, 3 times, 4 times, and every time you can tell a different story. And the interesting thing about these different levels is that you can experience the animals very, very, very different. If this nice book is the exhibit, for instance, the tiger on a higher level works much more interesting because you see him eye to eye, and the little tiger is on your level. If you only look upon animals as in the old zoos, then sometimes it's much less interesting. But looking down, looking up, the variation is always best. So, who do you need to make the perfect zoo? As told, you don't need an architect as the main designer, as the main person who knows it all, because your local architect, your local landscape architect doesn't know. It's important that zoo people themselves, being curators, directors, or head keepers or keepers, know about these principles. Principles not being very difficult, but very important for a good visitor experience in your zoo. So I really think we should all be zoo designers. Everybody working in a zoo should know a little bit about zoo design. Thank you for your attention.